Hello, my name is Samantha Gonzalez, and I am a part of Group 3. For our group topic, we decided to better identify some of these theories through Republican versus Democratic groups and really explain what identifies those groups and what their social form comes from. Now, of course, since the Democratic and Republican Party goes back to the late early 1800s, it of course has evolved over time, but has still kept those social standards within the group. For one of our theories, we chose social identity theory, and we felt this best related to this certain topic because of the emotional attachment tied into it. Of course, being that most people who side with Democratic or Republican, it's truly stems from what they want out of their livelihood, out of their economy and community. And once you identify with those certain things, those are standards you help within the group, maintaining those outer and inner group components. And in order to understand is gonna be a little more complex throughout this presentation only because it's so biased. But once you understand that they do target dissimilar audiences, you'll understand the way they communicate and why it is different and how they identify. Going forward, we know that a lot of the social connection derives from what people's preferences are. And once you're kind of under the umbrella of a hierarchy, your preferences tend to mold and kind of form into what helps form those certain groups and just maintaining that structure. I hope y'all enjoy this introduction and enjoy the rest of the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of the members of our group.
The social identity theory, according to the 4 criteria phenomenon, is considered the most useful identity theory. So, the social identity theory refers to how people self-enhance as members of social identity groups. This was developed by Tajfel and Turner in 1986, and this theory has 4 stages: social categorization, social identity formation, social comparison, and psychological distinctiveness. We're first going to talk about social categorization. This is the way the world categorizes us and the way that we categorize ourselves. For example, a social category would be a political party. So whether you categorize yourself as a Republican or a Democrat, this is considered a part of how we social categorize. So group memberships change over time and meet us at different times in our life. So in primary school and high school, sometimes I feel as though categories are more chosen for us. And as we grow up, we really do start to make those decisions and those group memberships for ourselves. Specifically as an adult, it's used to place us within our political beliefs. So the liberal versus conservative movement is a common example of this. As we continue to change who we are and grow, our political identification puts us in a certain category. This is also often affected by the way that we categorize ourselves growing up. So going back to the previous slide, on the way that you grow up, it can affect the way that we now become and this category that we meet as a Democrat. It could result from our uprising and our upbringing. Okay, so social identity formation is the stage that happens once we know what category we're in. It's pretty basic. This can be positive or negative. So is it good or bad to be a Republican? Does it make you bad because you vote for a certain president? Does it make you good because you voted for a certain president? So, social comparison is considered the core of the social identity theory. You do not want to belong to any negative group. We use judgments and comparisons to differentiate what we determine as good and bad. This helps us feel prideful with the group that we identify with, and this is also how we make ourselves feel better than other groups. So Republican versus liberal discussion in regards to this. Pro-life versus pro-choice. If I say I'm pro-choice, I'm considered a baby killer by the opposite. If I say I'm pro-life, I'm considered anti-woman by the opposite. Gun control versus anti-gun control. If I'm for gun control, I want to take away our constitutional rights to bear arms. If I'm against it, I believe mass murder is okay. So we use this theory to pretty much differentiate, and it helps us feel better about ourselves by being able to bring someone else down on their beliefs. Thinking this way helps us feel prideful and justified in what we believe in. Social comparison is often used to promote political beliefs. Psychological distinctiveness is the last phase. This is the intended outcome of social comparison. We exaggerate differences between social groups and minimize the ones that are happening internally. In regards to the Democratic Party, there are often two groups, liberal and progressive, and it's an ongoing argument. But we often forget that we have differences internally because we're so against the other Republican Party. So we often forget it. Psychological distinctiveness really just refers to forgetting about the differences between our two groups so that we can enhance the differences between the other group. So the next theories that we're going to be talking about are self-categorization theory, self-stereotyping, ethno-linguistic identity theory, self-identity theory, self-dominance theory.
Social dominance theory, or SDT, is defined as all human societies that are structured as systems of group-based social hierarchies. SDT contains three forms of hierarchies that range from age, sex, and race. This theory argues that group hierarchy is unavoidable given human nature, and it focuses on the conservation of social hierarchies during profitable surfeit. These societies are broken into one or more dominant groups located at the top and minorities at the bottom. Keep in mind that social values can be seen as having the authority, power, and best healthcare, to name a few. Both the Democratic and Republicans determine and argue about wages, healthcare, laws, and regulations. This basically shows what each party represents when it comes to for the people and those that are invested in the interest of the economy. Individuals within these systems disseminate in supporting these social hierarchies. Legitimizing myths are the points of view, worth, faith, stereotypes, and ideologies that provide moral justification for the social practices that issue social value within the social system. This ties back to stereotyping the Democratic Party or the Republican Party based on the decisions that are made within the political scene that we may or may not be in agreement with. The decisions these parties make shape the way we think and the actions that we take. Now that we've discussed social dominance theory, let's briefly focus on self-categorization theory. Self-categorization theory explains how group members categorize themselves in order to maximize their differences, without specific mention of individuals' motives or needs. No self-motive, unlike social identity theory. If we're looking at how Democrats and Republicans self-categorize themselves, it's safe to say that they each stand for different but alike rights for the people. They each place themselves in a category where the people can easily relate and recognize. For instance, we discussed that Democrats emphasize in social equality, protecting the environment, supporting voting and minority rights to include LGBT, multiculturalism, and religious secularism, while Republicans advocate decreasing taxes, capitalize social programs, and strongly support nourishing the rights of workers.
Ethno-linguistic identity theory is an extension of social identity and is group-based, and it just talks about how groups struggle to maintain positive group identity relative to others, and also why certain group experience positive social change and others don't. ELIT predicts that social group members will differentiate themselves from one another when individuals strongly identify within an in-group. This is usually the outspoken people and sometimes leaders. They perceive cognitive alternatives to in-group status when their group has vitality or a lack of vitality, and vitality is usually based off of high status, demographic, and also a support form. And when their group or the other group has closed and hard boundaries, basically meaning they're not able to express themselves because there's so many rules. So an example, former President George W. Bush and Senator Mitt Romney, though being very big people in the Republican Party, have publicly said they will not support the re-election of Republican nominee President Donald Trump. Usually, it is customary for the corresponding party, which is the Republican Party, to support the standing president in re-elections. However, they believe Donald Trump's strategies to control police brutality, the coronavirus, and immigration were below America's standards. They are examples of differentiating themselves from the Republican Party. So, optimal distinctiveness theory. This theory focuses on the individual and group membership. It explains motivation of individuals to assimilate with or differentiate from others. Assimilation means to be a part of something larger than themselves for validation. Differentiation means to be a unique individual. These are usually based on individuals' motives and psychological needs, and it has no direct mention of comparison or competition, and no claim that we maximize differences within other groups. So an example of this theory is each member of a political party assimilate with which group fits their political agenda the most. Each party is different when talking about policies and stances on current issues. However, each member has a set of beliefs that make them a part of something bigger than themselves. For example, an activist against pro-life will join the Democratic Party to differentiate themselves from the Republican Party, who approve of pro-life rather than pro-choice. When talking about assimilation and differentiation, we attempt to maintain a balance between these states by choosing a particular group memberships at particular times to meet one or both. So for each person, this can be a very difficult thing to do, and also can be very easy for them. It just depends, especially when deciding whether to differentiate or assimilate.
In conclusion, through the social identity theory, both these groups place themselves into social categories. For example, if you think a certain way, you or someone else will categorize you as a Republican, but if you think another, you are a Democrat. And sometimes we seek meaning in life and self-categorize into groups that fit our own beliefs, which sometimes leads to in-group bias, or you sometimes end up favoring your own group instead, which may come with complications and competition when the two groups come face to face to debate policies or trying to prove which politician is better than the other. In politics, the use of jargon is very common in communication between the Republican and Democratic culture, and there are political terms or political speech that is commonly used by those who are inside of politics. Between these two political groups, topics are worded differently. For example, Democrats will say undocumented immigrants, gun safety, and estate tax, while Republicans will instead use terms illegal aliens, gun control, and death tax. There are also terms in which politicians and civilians from which could be either the Republican or Democratic Party use to differentiate themselves, or they insult their opposite group, and they use jargon such as right-wing, left-wing, a flip-flopper, which is a candidate or politician who changes his mind on certain issues, or feminazi, which is a militant feminist who is viewed as going overboard on women's issues, red state, which is a state that prefers Republicans, blue state, which is a state that primarily votes for Democrats, public servant, which is a political jargon word for an elected official, rhino, which is a term that is used to criticize Republicans who often side with Democrats. And lastly, blue dog, which is a Democrat who is likely to side with Republicans on certain issues. In regards to communication, the Republican and Democratic parties may have challenges in trying to reach common ground when placing policies for society. Since the dominant group has different priorities than the subordinate group, it can lead to social disparities. It may be difficult for these groups to communicate with each other since they feel pride in their own groups that they are part of, in which they may lead to an in-group bias. However, we do have the freedom to categorize ourselves into whatever group we wish, and we can change our minds if we want to. Being part of a group is not permanent, and we are able to change how we perceive ourselves and others no matter what group or political party we are a part of.